You were in Vietnam, if I understand it correctly, most of 1969, well, from
Th-
69 to 72.
Yes, the tail end of 69 and the beginning of 72. What I did basically was I went over as a second lieutenant with about 6 months in grade. I volunteered to go over and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division upon arriving in country. As a second lieutenant, I was automatically an infantry platoon leader. So I went out and joined my platoon and had my platoon there in the Reconnaissance for about 6 or 7 months. Then at that time, if you were a lieutenant and you had your platoon that period of time, they generally moved you back to a fire base area rather than going around at the field locations and made you a battalion staff officer. So I was the S5 initially, which is PSYOPs and Civil Affairs, and then I worked my way into the S2 position there as the intel officer for the battalion, where I had 6 recon teams I deployed. I had the mortars, I had the seismic intrusion devices, and the radar teams that I deployed in that position, and was also responsible for the Nighthawks that we flew. What happened then, I wasn't coming up on my year, but I was close. I decided I wanted to be back with the troops rather than sitting securely on a fire base being a staff officer.
Mm.
So I was asked if I would extend to get a company. And I said, oh, hell yeah. So I extended as a lieutenant and had a company in the 101st. And it was a good unit, but I took it over when the company commander was relieved and had some people hurt, and they were basically combat ineffective as the company. So they sent me out there, and the time I had it, we got squared away and did what we were supposed to be doing. After that, I wanted to extend and see what the ARVN troops were like. So I volunteered for the next 6 months to go to the ARVN Airborne Division, which was located in Saigon, but deployed anywhere they were needed. They were the strategic force for Vietnam. Whenever there was a big firefight, they were deployed to take up the slack or break it up or to end it. So I had a 6 month extension with the ARVN Airborne Division, during which time I got there in January, late January, and in February we kicked off with Lam Son 719,
Right,
which was the Laotian invasion
right.
by the ARVN. As a
Wow.
result, as a result of Congress at that time, we as advisors could not go with the people that we advised into Laos. We had to stop at the border. So we formed up our tactical operations center out of Quezon up there
Right.
and conducted what we could from our side of it. After that extension, with the ARVN Airborne Division, I extended again, but this time, this 6 month extension was to go back to American troops. Now, keep in mind, this is the middle of 1971, and American troops were sort of on the slide at that time and place.
Right.
But I had managed to get the job as commanding officer of Gulf Ranger Company, which was in the 23rd Division, AmeriCal, which was the largest ranger company in Vietnam. So I extended and went to the Gulf Ranger Company for that extension. However, what they didn't tell me when they hired me was that they were phasing out. This was when we were drawing down on troops, and they closed down the Ranger Company and kept just one platoon.
Mm.
So I told them I did not want a company in the AmeriCal division. That what I wanted to do at that time was go back and go to the three corps or three border region in two corps, which is Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, the tri-border region there, and work with the ARVN Border Rangers, which basically at
Wow.
each camp we had a battalion of Montagnards and a ARVN Special Forces detachment that we worked with.
You worked with ARVN forces. You worked with ARVN Airborne, ARVN Border Rangers. By the time your very long service in Vietnam had come to an end, what was your perspective on ARVN forces? What was your assessment of them?
I found every ARVN unit that I was with, especially the airborne and rangers, those guys are like our airborne and rangers. They volunteered more, they have better training, they're supported more, and they get put more in combat than the regular Joe. Okay. They were outstanding and totally gallant and brave individuals. I put my life in their hands multiple times and was never let down. And that's not only the ARVN. I also held the NVA and the VC in very high respect because as a young officer, whenever we would dig in with the platoon or company size element, wherever we were in hostile territory, we would dig up people that they had lost and just buried, salted all over the land. You know,
Wow.
they I respect them more than I do the Americans at home that felt they needed to go to Canada or evade the draft by going in the guard or whatever.
Did you assess the VC and the NVA differently, or did you see them effectively as the same thing?
No, they were two different domains, okay? And the difference became on multiple different levels. First, the deployment. The VC were normally in smaller groups. They were in an area that they were either familiar with or actually grew up in. So they had the home court advantage. And their goal was to stay alive, which was hit and run, live to fight another day. So they laid mines and booby traps, which were probably as many casualties in Vietnam. I would guess 40% of them were from mines and booby traps. So that's the VC, hit and run. They don't stay in a fight. The NVA, when they got in a fight, Lam Son 719, they stayed and fought. They had, for Lam Son 719, anti-aircraft fire. They shot down 110 helicopters in that operation. They damaged 400. They had artillery support.
Hmm.
So you're talking about armament and training and supporting units. So the NVA are a tactical element where the VC were sort of a startup team.
Hmm.
But either one, if you took a hit from them, you wouldn't fare very well. I mean, hit by casualty.
So let's say in 1972, early 72, by the end of your tour, you've had by this time a lot of experience with the NVA. You've also had a lot of experience with the ARVN. By early 72, did you feel confident that the ARVN would be able to stand up and defend South Vietnam against the NVA?
I thought they would be able to if we lived up to what we told them with support, airframes. Air controls quite a bit in a combat operation.
Hmm.
If you don't have air superiority, you're going to take a lot more casualties. I'm thinking now about Lam Som 719. What happened there was we went in and they established fire bases. And at one of the fire bases where my brigade headquarters from the Airborne Division was established, they were overrun by the NVA with 5 tanks.
Wow.
Those tanks were on the perimeter and in the wire when we had tactical air above there. The
Okay.
tactical air that we had, which was American forces, was diverted because one American plane was shot down. So they left the ARVN high and dry. The,
Oh, so they weren't there to take care of the tanks.
yeah,
So let's talk about Lam Son 719. What role did you play in Lam Son 719 as that's unfolding?
well, my battalion, which was the 8th Battalion, was the lead element. going into Laos. We were attached with one armor battalion with us, and we were on Highway 9 at the river crossing there that night. We, the Americans, had to stay on this side of the river. Our troops crossed over and went into battle where they were for the next 90 days.
And these are
It,
ARPs, you're saying, crossing the border into Laos.
yeah, we could not do that. We were prohibited.
Now, the Americans
And
are providing air support and
yes,
artillery support.
air artillery, and we had Americans on the Vietnamese side providing support. The 101st Airborne Division that I just left was the key ones, and their 1st Aviation Brigade. They're the ones that provided the helicopters for medevacs, for recons, and for moving troops in. That's how they lost 110 choppers shot down during that time, 400 damaged.
Wow. So as Lam Son 719 is unfolding then, and the ARVN forces that you work with is they're heading across the border into Laos, then what are you doing throughout that operation? What role are you playing? What kinds of decisions are you making? What kinds of orders are you giving?
We're providing support to them best we can. What we did as advisors was set up at Quezon Fire Base, which is right across the border in that region. And we set up a tactical operations center there and did evacuations and support the best we could without going in country. The night before, we were digging in our defensive positions before crossing over. We were hit by an American jet off the aircraft carrier Ranger. He he had not been told of the operation, and the area that we were in was a free fire zone.
Oh, wow.
So he came out of Laos, recon, thought he saw movement, and just popped one CBU bomb on us. And that CBU bomb hit my battalion and the battalion that was the armor that was with us, took out a couple of APCs, and it killed 14 of our guys and wounded 74. That's the night before they go off the next day. We spent the evening evacuating the medical people, doing triage for the medevacs and everything. I tried to get them, being the supporting element, to backhaul the bodies because we just had them right there by the river, and they wouldn't do that. So the next morning, when my troops walked by, they walked by, they're dead into the jaws of what they were in the next 90 days. My battalion came back with 65 men.
Starting with how many?
65. They started with, I think, probably about 600.
Did that pilot from the Ranger ever know?
I
Knew?
don't know if he got it or not, but I sent him a letter without knowing who it was. And with the military the way it is, I don't know if it found its way through. But my letter was telling him that it was the fog of war. It was nothing that he did. He was absolutely right. And if he placed any of the other bombs on them like he did us, he did a shit hot job. You
Wow.
know,
What motivated you to send him that letter?
because fratricide, friendly fire, and stuff like that, you wouldn't believe the statistics on that. I can't tell you the number of times that I was involved in something with people just not doing their job. You know, I had just been in country 5 weeks or so, and I heard an element that was across the river. I called back and checked with battalion if anyone was there, and they said no one was there, but I wouldn't engage them because I knew, as loud as they were, they couldn't possibly be the enemy.
Hmm.
And it turns out they opened up on us with their M60 machine guns and came within inches of my head,
Wow.
you know. But that was someone doing stupid, and this pilot did not do stupid. He did his job to the best of his ability.
Let's go back to November 69 when you show up in Vietnam for the first time. You said that some of the first soldiers you commanded there had that 1,000-mile stare.
Yeah, they were the group from Hamburger Hill. They really, they had like 74 wounded, 400, or excuse me, 74 killed in the 70s and 400 wounded in action. The same thing on the backside of that was I was supporting the backside of Firebase Ripcord, which also had like 70 plus killed in action and 400 wounded in action. So we were sort of sandwiched. One was on the front end, then I was on the back end with the others. But if we go back, those people, you can tell combat veterans who have really been through the loop, and they just had that look in their eye. And when I got to my platoon, there were some of those, but one of the things I grew up thinking was the NCOs are the backbone of the Army. They're the experience base. They're the ones that make things happen when things get going. So the first thing I do when I get to my platoon site is call over my platoon sergeant and talk to him. And I asked him, my first question was, well, how long have you been in Vietnam? He said, oh, 6 months, sir. I said, that's great. How long have you been in the Army? You know, uh, and you know what his answer was?
Hmm,
9 months.
9 months.
9 months. He had been a shake and bake
Shake and bake.
E5, was an
Okay.
honor graduate, so came out at E6.
Wow.
There's a 6 months experience in Vietnam and 3 months learning to get ready for Vietnam.
I'm thinking of a young lieutenant who shows up in Vietnam with no combat experience yet, and you're immediately in command of guys who have seen very serious fighting. So, what is your strategy as a young officer to gain the respect of these guys who know that in terms of rank, you're in charge, but who also know that in terms of experience, you're brand new, so you don't know what you're talking about, whereas they're the ones with all the experience, junior enlisted guys. What was your strategy as an officer to kind of, work with that?
Well, first, more than my strategy, I think one of the things in Vietnam that people didn't realize is when you had your new guys come in country, you generally paired them with someone that was experienced and understood what it was about, and they were sort of assigned to teach him the ropes. So you used your best privates and corporals to develop your staff. That's how you taught them the various positions, how to set things up at night, how to lay out a claymore, what techniques and techniques they needed to be using. So the mentorship through the low experience base was very, very important there. The way you get their respect is, first of all, don't ever ask anybody to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself.
Mhm.
And if you've got high standards, you demonstrate your acceptability of those standards by modeling the behavior. And it doesn't take long under those circumstances. But at the same time, you can't put up with something that's not right. One of the things I did when I saw my guys cooking their C rations with Claymore C4, Claymore's your best personal defense weapon. Why in the hell would you use that to cook your C rations?
Which I know is very common.
Well, yes, it was. And you know what I did?
Mm.
I inspected all the Claymores. Any one that was damaged, I did a statement of charges on them and made them pay for it. And then guess what? They didn't do that anymore. Now,
Mm.
if we had C4 sticks for blowing trees up, I didn't have a problem with that. You didn't use that C4 to defend your life at night and the lives of your men.
Mm. Did the soldiers understand? That's something that you hear about constantly. Take a pinch of the C4 and heat up your hot dogs and beans or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
beans and weenies, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, beans and weenies. Um,
Bangers and mash, yeah. Oh, you're
yeah,
giving me, gonna make me hungry there, all that good food.
but did I'm guessing if the soldiers are accustomed to doing this and then all of a sudden they can't do it anymore, there was a little grievance about that. But did they come to see your rationale?
Oh yeah. No, they realized the only way we were going home was us working together and everyone doing their job and being brave about what you do. Don't half step. I mean, that's one of the jobs as a lieutenant is to check your men, check their feet. That's what NCOs do. Because there they'd get jungle rot and they'd hide it until they could be medevaced in some cases, you know. You got to know your troops and take care of them. And
Yeah.
if you do, they'll take care of you.
What was your first experience of combat?
First experience was just slight ambushes in the lowlands there, because when I got there, the battalion had been through Hamburger Hill, and they had been given a mission of working with in the district area, training some of the indige people there, both the rough puffs and the regular forces, as well as some of the village defense forces.
Hmm.
So they'd been off of that. And when we left that to move to a different mission in January of 1970, at that time we were given a mission of clearing a 3,500 meter stretch of road of mines and booby traps where the VC had been before us. Okay. That 3,500 meters, I was given the order from my company commander to clear it that day. We were going in there with Arvin, and the Arvins landed a Chinook there, and the Chinook set off a booby trap. I think it killed 3 and wounded 4. And then we went in by foot. And I got about 30 meters down the trail and found a booby trap of 82 millimeter mortars that was daisy chained together with 6 rounds in the ambush site. So I defused that because I had a lot of demo training as a special forces enlisted. So I liked working with stuff like that because I understood it better than the people that did not, you know.
Yeah.
So my company commander told me I was entirely too slow, that he was coming down to motivate me. So he came down. I told him he could take my platoon if he wanted. I didn't care. I wasn't going any faster. Well, when he got down there and saw what we had done, he realized, and our objective was reached, that he wanted me to reach that day 90 days later.
90 days later.
90 days
Wow.
later, after we cleared it a meter at a time and then cleared the sides of the roads and everything.
And that's because there were so many traps.
Yeah, mines and booby traps,
You
absolutely.
just had to go that slowly. Wow.
And we had flame drops. We had the Bangalore torpedoes. We had the little det cord that you'd shoot in a rocket that would blow off a path, but it would only sympathetic detonation for some. The flame drops would burn off the trip wires if there were trip wires, but it wouldn't do the pressure or other ways of detonation.
Now, you mentioned that you also, again, in this very long tour, you have multiple back-to-back tours you have in Vietnam, that you work with the Montagnards. What was your assessment of them?
They were fiercely loyal and they were very brave and would stay and make battle in a fight. And the reason for this partially is because they had their families there with them,
Hmm.
in the camps. And they were either in an area where the VC or NVA came in and exploited them, or we came in and trained them to fight the VC. Just ebb and flow back and forth.
Are you saying the Montagnards would switch sides?
Of course.
Hmm.
not willingly,
Okay.
but when we pull out and leave them, they're survivor. You know,
Yeah,
of the forces, we never knew how many were what. You know,
I
in
see.
some cases, but those people are just trying to stay alive.
Did you, when you were in operations with the Montagnards, did you feel that they were trustworthy, that you could rely on them?
Uh, Minus 30%. That's the rule of thumb. You
Sure.
always you always were alert,
Right.
and you
And then,
always studied your people, and you sort of knew who
sure.
was what.
You also mentioned you briefly referred to the regional forces and the popular forces, the rough puffs. Um, Relative to the Arvin, so your view of the Arvin, you have a high view of the Arvin that you served with. What was your assessment of the regional popular forces you worked with?
They were not near as good as the Americans or the other four folks. They were uh, not quick to stay in a fight. You're never really sure that you could trust all of them. I mean, that was always an issue,
Sure,
identification. And
sure.
that was especially, when we had all our chew hoys and people working with us, they, you had to work with them and go through a couple of operations with them to see how they worked, to know what you had. And once you knew what you had and they knew what they had, things were much better.
Did you ever have a case where you determined that a Chuhoi was playing both sides? Or that,
Had had a couple I turned in to be checked on.
okay. You weren't sure
But
that they were actually
yeah,
planted by the NBA?
yeah, because in battle, people are there or they're not. And if they're not there, where are they?
Mm, right, right. Among the many things you did, you also were involved in psyops. What was the psyops work you did?
During the time I was S5, we did two things. We did pacification because that strip that we cleared, we then moved in 17,000 refugees into the Phong Dien area up there in ThaIen province.
The pacification, did that involve the creation of leaflets that were then dropped on
Oh yeah,
villages?
we had leaflet drops. The biggest and most successful PSYOPs thing was the leaflet drops that we did. The PSYOPs was, you don't have to be suffering. You can come over to our side and we'll take care of you and take care of your families and feed you and pay you and all that. You don't want to die. They have the B-52 there dropping their bombs. And I mean, can you imagine being on the receiving end of that?
Right.
So that was a pretty effective program. Another program that was very, very effective was cash money for arms or booby trap knowledge. That was a very good campaign that worked very well. But
So if a villager, for example, knew where a booby trap was, then if they gave you that intelligence, then they would be compensated for that.
yes,
Okay. Now, how would you prevent somebody basically creating a booby trap with the intention of then, basically saying, well, I'll create a booby trap and then I'll tell them I found it and then I'll get paid. Was there a way of dealing with that kind of stuff, or is that just something you lived with?
no, it would be hard to define that because if you don't have the material that you need for a booby trap, where's that come from? What we got there, most of our booby traps, where they got them from?
Or captured
From
captured
us.
munitions? Yeah,
Artillery rounds that fired that didn't go off.
right.
I remember one time finding a humongous bomb in the middle of the jungle that had been cut into and all the explosives taken out of.
So the payment then for intelligence related to traps and mines, that would not be, for example, for a punji pit or something like that.
No,
Okay.
by the time I got there, I really didn't see much punji pits except in defensive positions when they had sites out in the mountains and were doing it sort of defensively.
Someone could come to you and say, in such and such village, in such and such hut, there's a hole, and in that hole, you've got a cache of,
Or they could bring it in.
or they could bring it in. So it sounds like then that's psyops, but that's also intelligence. So you're doing intelligence work as well.
The best psyops is actually the best intelligence. Let me give you an example. The absolute most successful I've ever been in gathering local intelligence from the indigenous people is through their med caps, the medical things when you go in the village and you entertain and you provide an area where a good way is have a big tent and they run through the tent so no one knows who's doing what with whom. If you leave them in a group, then they watch one another and it's a little more difficult. But if you isolate them and take care of them, it works out pretty good.
I see,
But the
yeah.
med caps, if you go in, the Special Forces team has engineers as one of their primary MOSs. Those engineers can do both vertical and horizontal construction, plus they can blow up about anything, you know. And if you go in and dig a well, build a school, or do something to help them, your vets, because Special Forces also has vets at brigade level, dentists at brigade level, and you can run a med cap, go in and do those things. And after you've established a presence there and you get to know the people, they take you as someone trying to help them and will help you. So that's one of the best sources of intel out there.
Do you feel, I've heard from a number of Vietnam vets that the effort may have been more likely to have succeeded if there had been a greater emphasis placed on hearts and minds. I know there was a lot of hearts and minds stuff, but they say had there been significantly more, then the chances of success in South Vietnam would have been greater. Do you share that view?
The hearts and minds is problematic because when we're there, it's one thing. When we're not there, the VC are there. There's
Right.
that constant, when we've talked about that earlier, of going back and forth, just trying to survive, you know. So hearts and minds, if you win them and the other guy comes in there, you still don't have them because they're going to do exactly the same thing to stay alive, you know. So the hearts and mind was one school of thought. The other school of thought was grab them by the balls and the heart will follow. But that's not true because what have you done there? You've made an enemy of someone who's going to find a way if he can to even the table or score.
Were the VCs still formidable? I mean, you get there, you arrive fairly late and you leave very late in the Vietnam experience. And, often we hear during Tet, the Viet Cong were effectively decimated. I think it's less true in the Mekong. Um, but it sounds like from what you're saying that the VC were still a formidable problem late in the war.
No, I wouldn't say they were a formidable problem. I just frame everything about you've got to understand the context of that.
Okay,
Their capability and density and control of the areas had shrunk greatly.
okay,
That wherever they were, that was what was happening.
I see.
And that could just be one little small space out of, you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
When I was a Ranger Company commander, they came out with a dictum in General Hennessy was the guy who came out with that there would be absolutely no AK-47s with American troops because they'd been filmed. And at that time, there was controversy. What's the best weapon? M16, AK, blah, blah, blah. Well, it depends whichever one you're used to, and know the best. But I didn't accept that. So I wrote the general a letter and said, I'd like to talk to you about it, but here's basically what I'm going to say. I said, let me tell you why I need AKs for my point men in Vietnam. When you're walking point, you're out there and you bump into someone. The first thing you see is their weapon. The second thing you see is their eyes, and then you take it from there. So if having an AK gives my guy a
Hmm.
split second advantage, I want my man to have that split second advantage. The second reason I want that is if you're quick and you got an AK and you're close and you pop 2 rounds in them, that's no big deal. They do that for link ups all the time. So you haven't compromised anything. If you pop them with an M16, that's a different sound. Gringos are in the area. Okay. The next thing is, since they're only 6-man teams and you run out of ammo, if you're out of ammo, chances are there's their weapons and their ammo right there that you can resupply without a chopper. So those were my reasons. General Croson called me up and said, or called me up to see him and said, yeah, Ted, I understand what you're saying and I will let you do this. However, he didn't say he'd have my balls. He said he would be quite burned if any of my men were photographed with an AK. And I told him if any of my men were photographed, he had a lot bigger problems than the AK.
Because here we're talking about the recon teams, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean, who'd be taking pictures?
exactly.
So
Yeah,
that's,
gosh, I mean, this is so another thing you're involved in then. And their job is primarily to gather information and
yeah,
yeah,
collect intelligence on movement, locations, camps, supply caches, and stuff like that.
okay.
They also did POW snatches or captured people in in firefights and whatnot.
I want to ask you a question going back to Lam Son 719. So you're an officer and um, several hundred Arvin have gone into Laos and 65,
17,000.
well, I mean of your forces, of the forces under
Oh, okay.
you.
Oh, my battalion.
Yeah. So your battalion of several hundred go into Laos, 65 come out.
They went in with their division. The
Okay.
ARVN Airborne Division, the Marine Division, the 1st ARVN Division, it was all an ARVN war.
Yeah.
All the forces across the border were ARVN.
As an officer, what impact did it have on you when you learned of incredible casualty uh, the incredible casualties in that fight?
I wanted to resign at that time because we were advisors to bring them the aircraft support, the artillery support, the medevacs. That was our job facilitating all of that. They were hamstrung without us. I wanted to resign. I couldn't believe that I couldn't do with my troops. That was my mission. And you're telling me I can't do my job because Congress said that. If I could sign a statement and go, I'd be fine with that.
What was it that prevented U.S. forces from bringing all of that assistance to bear?
They said it was part of the Vietnamization program that the Americans would not participate in certain operations and cross border because up until that time, the whole time, Laos and Cambodia was off limits.
Right.
I mean, we couldn't even do cross border ops without that being approved at the National Command Authority level. Think about the incursions. I mean, when you think of the troops that North Vietnam had staged and based in Cambodia and Laos, right there on the border, and couldn't be touched.
So as an officer, it sounds like you felt like you were sending these armed forces basically to get slaughtered by,
Half a league onward,
yeah,
Gallant 500.
yeah, yeah.
You know, and if you're in the military, there may be a time when it's your time to die, you know, for the good of the order, you know, and you never know when that is. But if you don't sacrifice this platoon, you may lose the whole company, and that company may turn into the battalion, you know. So each and everyone's got to do their job.
And so your thought that, um, I want to resign, is that's just because you felt helpless?
Yeah, I felt helpless and didn't do what I felt I was trained to do and should have been doing.
Right. And you felt hamstrung by the rules of engagement.
Yes.
Suppose, I put you in front of a group of young people, or let's say even young officers, um, and you've been asked to speak just for a couple minutes and to say, here's the most important thing I learned as an officer in Vietnam. Um, what do you think you'd say? What's the most important thing you learned as an Army officer in this, very long service in Vietnam?
I think the most important thing is mission comes first, but people are right up there with it. You've always got to accomplish the mission, but the way to do that is through your people. The way you go through your people is by setting the example, doing nothing or telling them to do nothing that you haven't displayed to them that you're willing to do. That's like I walk point. It's stupid for an officer to walk point, you know, statistically. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But you've got to show them that you're willing to do what you expect them to do. So there's a time when it may not be in your job description, but you need to set the example and create the expectations of what you expect out of them. And
Hmm.
that's one thing that I stayed over there so long because I had an affinity for that. I really did. And I'm very deep in survivor's guilt. I didn't know if I'd ever come home from Vietnam. I really didn't give a hoot if I did or not. I wasn't married, and so many young men with wives and families were killed, and here I was, you know, just making it through.